Matter. Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine, Chapter 24. What is matter, and what does matter have to do with our spiritual journey? Hello, this is Chris speaking. Wake up with another video about Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine, this time Chapter 24 in the first book, Matter. Matter is the basis. Without matter, there is no experience. Without matter, there is no life, and there is no consciousness taking up form. Sri Aurobindo says at the beginning of the chapter that we now know that life is not an inexplicable dream, nor is it an impossible evil or a dolorous fact. In fact, it is a mighty pulsation of divine all-existence. But we need at its foundation a principle. A principle that makes sure it's not just a pure illusion. There are illusionist attributes about this reality, but it's not just a dream, not just an illusion. Maya is rooted in something, and that is matter. Our minds, our bodies, our lives depend upon a physical principle, an outflowing and outflowering of life that results in consciousness, expanding, and becoming supramental existence at some point. Involution and evolution. The divine has to involute into matter so that matter can then evolute into the supramental consciousness. But supramental not just as an idea, but as something that actually exists, that manifests. This whole manifestation stuff has to take place in something, in matter. Something that receives. If there is no such a receptacle, such a receiving substance that we call matter, something more dense, then all promise of life is cancelled, all meaning annulled. Then everything is just a thought experiment, and there can be no higher consciousness, no Satchidananda to be realized. There can be no journey of spirituality, of consciousness, of enlightenment, of awakening. Nothing takes place. Which is, of course, what is always claimed by the Advaitists, that nothing is actually taking place. There is nothing. And this is where Sri Aurobindo and the Advaita philosophers eternally disagree. Sri Aurobindo says there's something beyond this realization that nothing exists and nothing happens. This is just a stage on the journey of enlightenment, and beyond that, things start to happen again, but in a very, very subtle way. But if you really take a realistic look at what our experience is, our day-to-day experience is that there is a body and there's something that we call, let's call it the soul. And for the soul, the body is some kind of stumbling block, a rock of offense. There's always this need to get rid of it or to control it somehow, or at least to sustain it. Matter, and thus the body as well, is obstinate, obscure, gross. It's almost an obsession with how we feel like and how we look like physically, and what we perceive with our 5 physical senses. And this, in many spiritual traditions, is like a curse. And we constantly try to free ourselves from this curse, from this obsession of physicality by meditation or other practices. It's more like a torture, and we'll try to get to grips with it by ascetic means, by renunciation. Or in the case of Advaita, by claiming that all this is just an illusion, 100% pure illusion. Or in other words, by denial. Our experience is one of struggle. Life is a struggle. Or life is suffering, as the Buddhists say. Life is a constant war with matter. A defeat of life is what we experience every day. You cannot win. Death is inevitable. Matter builds up into, for example, a human being, and then it dies and perishes and disintegrates again into its atoms and subatomic particles, which are, of course, just energy, speed, and consciousness. So it's a constant obstacle course, a constant running against walls, with certainty of defeat looming at the end of the tunnel. But these victories and defeats, they're only apparent. It's not the solution and not the escape from the problem. Sri Aurobindo says that life is not really defeated by matter. It looks like it, but that's not what is taking place. Nor is our mind victorious over life or matter. It's not powerful enough. What is really happening is that Satchitananda is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the struggle, or the apparent struggle. It's a labor of perfection of Satchitananda itself, in and by itself. And thus the scale is so large that we cannot see it. It's very difficult for us to see the scale because we only look at details, at aspects and little tiny parts of it. And then we can't see the whole model. It's like when you look at your life, if you look back 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, you have a larger, more complete scale than if you just look at 1 minute, maybe one uncomfortable minute. If you only judge this one uncomfortable minute without what happened before and afterwards, you have a very negative attitude towards life. But if you look at the whole life, it's much more multifaceted. What's actually happening is a constant victory of spirit over mind, life, body, and matter in which they are rooted. Instead of spirit, you could also say soul, or intuition, or divine spark, or consciousness. In a certain sense, matter does exist, and in another certain sense, matter does not exist, is unreal. It's merely a phenomenon of particular relations between our senses and the all-existence, in which we move, as Aurobindo calls it. Yeah? What we experience is neither consciousness nor matter in its purity. What we experience is an interplay between our senses and the all-existence, the absolute, and the movement in this interplay. This movement back and forth between these two things, our perceptions and the divine absolute, is what we call life, body, mind, and matter. This interplay, of course, has a name, Maya, and we are participating in Maya. We are co-creators. We're part of Maya. We are part of bringing Maya into existence every moment by this interplay of the divine and our senses. We're like children playing in a sandbox. And because we're playing with the sand and the toys and each other, we're shaping the sandbox. We're co-creating how the sandbox looks like and what's happening in there. It's not just the sandbox anymore. It's us and the sandbox. And part of us is aware that it is just a sandbox. It's not the whole reality, but we're focused on the sandbox and we pretend that this is the only reality. And for the duration of the game, it is. It's like those two funny movies, Jumanji, that have been refilmed with The Rock, with Dwayne Johnson. Quite funny, where they get sucked into a game. So they know it's just a game. On the other hand, they're bound to the rules of that game and can die within the game if they're not careful. All the time knowing it is just a game and that they just play roles in this game. That even the bodies they inhabit are not really their bodies. They're player characters. So I will stop here for today, otherwise it gets too long. There's much more in this chapter. It's very, very interesting. In the next chapter, also the knot of matter, it continues. But to wrap it up for today, we arrive at this truth of matter, that there's a conceptive self-extension of being which works itself out in the universe as substance or object of consciousness, and which cosmic mind and life in their creative action represent through atomic division and aggregation as the thing we call matter. Now, what we call matter is not really a substance, it is a creative action. It is an object of our consciousness and the divine consciousness. So it's actually exactly like a role-playing game or video game with avatars. And thus it's not completely real, but also not completely fake. There's a fictional element in it because we co-create all the time. And because we buy into the fiction all the time. So we have to become aware of this process that is happening in our soul, that we give substance, we assign substance and value of meaning and meaning to this matter. It is because we say and believe it is. But even if we stop believing in it, it will still remain because we're only co-creators, not the only creators. That's the misunderstanding with all this manifestation. You're not the only one manifesting here and co-creating here. Okay, more about matter in the next video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for giving thumbs up and hitting the bell button. Thank you for joining me as a Patreon, and see you soon.